What's going on, everybody? So there's been talk recently about a rumor of the PlayStation Vita 2, how Sony will compete with Nintendo again, and the potential of a PlayStation console hybrid. So the original PlayStation Vita released on December 17th, 2011. I actually purchased the Vita on day one, but when I got to GameStop, there was barely anybody there and plenty of Vitas to go around. It seemed like Sony was anticipating a lot more sales. So we all know, myself included, that the PlayStation Vita didn't do very well. The PSP, on the other hand, did a lot better. So with this recent talk about Sony making a PS Vita 2, I can't help but just become confused about it, because recently Sony announced that they're not going to focus on handhelds, and they're also discontinuing PS Vita. Back then, I used to be very enthusiastic about the Vita's tech. I would bring that thing everywhere, to work, to school, play some Dead or Alive 5 on my lunch break. That system was so revolutionary to me because I was the type of gamer that wanted to see console games on handheld. As well as gameplay, I loved graphics. So the PS Vita was a perfect handheld system for me. Of course, I had the Game Boy, DS, and 3DS, but I wanted to be more visually impressed. So I bought the Vita on day one. Now with that said, about sometime after the Nintendo Switch was announced, I completely forgot about my 3DS and PS Vita. Even though the PS Vita had some of my favorite video games in it, like Ninja Gaiden 1 and 2, Dead or Alive 5, Persona 4 Golden, Gravity Rush, and even Final Fantasy X and X-2 were on it. I think I had about 50 titles for the Vita, but seeing how the support for the Vita dropped, and there was basically no other big console games being ported over to the Vita until Catherine, I didn't really have a big interest in it anymore, so I sold it, because the Switch was so much more impressive to me. With my confidence about the Vita going down as well as Sony's, it just seemed logical to move on. So with all this talk about the Vita 2, it just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And another reason is, I don't think PlayStation would follow in somebody else's footsteps again, because the PlayStation Vita and PlayStation Move backfired and didn't sell very well. Every gimmicky idea that they copied hasn't worked out. Even though there was so much potential there, its unoriginality just wasn't enough to push those platforms. Now there are a vast majority of people that kind of still play their Vita, but it seemed like for every one person that owned a Vita, 100 people owned a 3DS. So I started to focus more on the 3DS because there was just more to talk about and more people to play with. And also the 3DS is still getting support till this day. The PlayStation Vita just didn't hit when it came out, or the couple years that it was out for, including how poor the marketing for it was, and how it was almost non-existent. I can't remember the last time I've actually seen an ad for the Vita, except for when they mentioned the remote play that it could provide for the PlayStation 4. But 7 years later, the excitement that most people had for the Vita is just gone, surprisingly including myself. So if you ask me if I think there's going to be a PS Vita 2, I don't see why Sony would divide their focus from the PlayStation 4, which is doing so well, and start going into handhelds almost just as soon as they announce that they're not going to focus on handhelds and that they're discontinuing the production of PlayStation Vita. It just doesn't seem realistic or logical for a company to do that. But it is kind of strange how the PS Vita is relevant now more than it's ever been in its entire lifespan. I guess it's that case of you don't know what you've had until it's gone. But I've always known what I had with the Vita, the first handheld to have graphics to almost rival PlayStation 3. Just because Nintendo did it doesn't necessarily mean that Sony could do it just as good, because they haven't over and over again. PSP did very well, but not for good reasons. The system sold well, but the games didn't. Its attachment rate was terrible. Most people bought a PSP to emulate other consoles or to download PSP games. There was a huge piracy issue with the PlayStation Portable. So yes, the system did do well, but the games did horrible. I remember going into that market as well. I bought some games for it, my last being Peace Walker, but around that time I was more into downloading. I even remember that there were specific batteries. I can't put it into detail, but I knew everything there was to know about hacking a PSP. So even though I was very enthusiastic about that system, I was a part of that majority that used that system as an emulator or to get free games, and that really hurt the PSP. When the Vita came out, it had a lot of security to the point that there was an app you had to go through just to connect it to a PC. It was very difficult, and that might have been the reason why people didn't buy it, considering what Sony went through with the PSP and also the Vita. I really hope Sony doesn't do it. If you ask me if there will be a PS Vita 2, because they've gone through so much pain from those two handheld consoles already, to the point that I wouldn't be surprised if Sony had PTSD with handhelds. but they shouldn't put all their eggs in one basket. But that's where PlayStation Now comes in. Of course, you can't download PlayStation games onto your PC, but you can stream all of the games with a paid subscription. So if the question still stands, what else should Sony do? Then the answer is they've already done it. PlayStation Now is kind of PlayStation on the go if you have it on a laptop, and I'm not positive if it's compatible with tablets. But seeing how Sony makes phones and how phones are getting more powerful, if they import PlayStation Now into phones, then technically that's your PlayStation Portable right there. Sony doesn't need to take the same steps that Nintendo takes, because their games alone are good enough that if they charge you a paid subscription just to have them on different platforms, that would most likely be enough. So of course I highly doubt that the Vita 2 will be coming out, or any type of hybrid would be coming out. But let me know what you guys think. Do you think there'll be a PS Vita 2, even though the Vita was discontinued and Sony apparently has no plans for handhelds? Or do you think something else could be going on here? Let me know in the comments below, and if you like this video, like and subscribe. Thanks for watching, guys. Later.